In U.S. immigration breaking news, President Biden is considering a new parole program. It is not yet in place, but he is expected to announce the parole program next week through an executive order. So the new parole program would be helpful for some U.S. citizen spouses who entered the U.S. unlawfully. Okay, so here's the current law. In order to get a green card in the United States, there are a few things that they look at. Number one, how you entered the U.S. matters, whether you entered lawfully or you entered unlawfully. And number two, how much of unlawful presence do you have? Okay, so if you are an undocumented spouse of a U.S. citizen who entered the country illegally, you came in without a visa, you came in through the border, you would usually be facing deportation and you are ineligible for a green card and U.S. citizenship. However, if you entered with a visa, say an F1 visa or a B2 visa, even if you've overstayed and you've accrued unlawful presence, you will be forgiven and you can apply for the green card as a spouse of a U.S. citizen without leaving the country. But if you entered without inspection, an unlawful entry or an illegal entry known as EWI, entry without inspection, then you usually cannot stay in the US and receive your green card. You would have a few options. Number one, spouses of US citizens who enter the country illegally, they would usually have to leave the country and stay outside for 10 years if they have been in the US and have accrued unlawful presence for more than 1 year. If they have only accrued unlawful presence for more than 180 days but less than 1 year, then they would have to leave the US for 3 years in order to be eligible for a green card. The second option that these people have if they entered the US unlawfully and their spouse, for example, of a US citizen, they would have to apply for a waiver. It's a 601A waiver, and this waiver would have to forgive their unlawful presence. And in order to be eligible for this waiver or to have this waiver approved, they must show that there would be extreme hardship to their US citizen or permanent resident or green card holder spouse or parent if they are deported from the United States. Then the third option is a parole-in-place, and that would help these people cure their unlawful entry into the United States. And parole-in-place is usually for people who have family members who are in the US military. Okay, so it's available for people like whose spouses, that's husband or wife or parents, sons or daughters, is or was an active duty member of the US Armed Forces or in the selected reserve of the Ready Reserve. And so if you are, for example, the spouse of a US citizen and you entered the US unlawfully and you have the parole-in-place, such as, because you're the family member of a military person, we can apply for a green card for you without leaving the US. Okay. Now, the proposal that President Biden or the executive order that he's expected to announce, this proposal or this parole-in-place would be expanded. Now, parole-in-place would be granted to undocumented spouses of US citizens who enter the US illegally, and this would allow them to remain in the country, work legally, and access permanent residency without leaving. Right? So Biden's program would expand parole-in-place not only to involve family members of people who have been in the military or who were in the US military and are now deceased. It would also include US citizen spouses who entered the US illegally, and this would benefit approximately about 1.1 million undocumented people who are spouses of US citizens. They entered unlawfully into the US and they are just perhaps don't qualify for a 601A waiver, or they are just afraid to apply for a 601A waiver and leave the US because they just feel like something could go wrong. Once President Biden implements this parole program to include undocumented spouses of US citizens who enter the country legally, then the US citizen spouses would no longer have to leave. They can stay here and then benefit from, getting a green card without having to leave the United States. So this would be wonderful news. I've seen a lot of confusion on the subject because it is not true that if you are the undocumented spouse of a US citizen, you cannot get a green card without leaving. If you are undocumented and you are here in the US and you are the spouse of a US citizen, you can't get a green card without leaving so long as you came in and you were inspected and admitted. You came in, for example, with a student visa, with any other type of non-immigrant visa, and then you overstayed your I-90 for the period of your authorized stay. This parole program is looking at spouses of US citizens who came in unlawfully, and because of the fact that they were not inspected and admitted, they would have to leave the US in order to get green cards, unless of course they fall under the exception of family members of military. But once this parole program is implemented, then they can continue to stay here in the US and get their green cards despite their unlawful entry into the United States. If you need help with any type of US immigration matter, we're your people to come to 802-780-0564. I can't wait to speak with you. Follow me for more.